Good morning, wonderful people. Thank you so much for joining us on this early Wednesday morning. I'm so excited to have you here for today's conversation. I'm going to get us started while folks are entering into the conversation today, so that we have the most time as possible with our presenters for you to ask questions and for us to learn from them. So thank you so much for joining us this morning. This is the eighth series in this session in this series. And my name is Danielle Hubely, and I manage advocacy and education with the Partnership for Strong Communities. We've been so excited and so grateful to host this series where we've been engaging in a wide range of conversations with advocates and leaders in other sectors to talk about the impact that a lack of safe, affordable housing has on their work and on our work as well. Some quick housekeeping before we dive in today. Today's session is going to be recorded and will be published to the Partnership's YouTube channel. And Amy will share the link to the channel in case you want to check out any of our other work or the other recordings from this series. We usually publish it within the week, and you will also get a notification once the recording is published to YouTube. So please check your emails in case there's anybody you want to share this conversation with who wasn't able to be here with us this morning. And additionally, if you have any questions, please use the chat box at the bottom right-hand side of your screen to add to today's conversation. The hour always goes quicker than we hope it will, so we'll aim to get through as many questions as possible. But in the instance that we don't, I'll also have today's presenters share their emails in the chat so that you can continue conversations beyond our hour together this morning. So with that, this series has been going on. It will run through October. We only have one more session left. We'll also share the link for that recording or for that webinar opportunity towards the end of today's presentation. But if you're wondering why we're not scheduling anything for November, it is because we are hosting our Affordable Housing Conference. It is fully free, fully virtual, and will take place November 18th and 19th this year. We really hope to see you. We have some really great keynote presenters lined up, as well as just a slew of incredible panels and conversations squared away. I'll also have Amy share in the chat. Registration for the conference opened yesterday. We've already got about 20 people registered, so please add your name to the list and plan to join us. There's going to be, like I said, a whole wealth of incredible conversations with housing advocates across the state and country. So please make sure you're a part of those discussions as well. So with that, let me first introduce you to the partnership and why we're hosting this series. The Partnership for Strong Communities promotes equitable change in Connecticut housing policy by coordinating advocacy, advancing research, and uniting diverse partners. Our vision is that everyone in Connecticut has a safe, stable home that's affordable to them in an equitable community of their choice. And we operate under the foundational belief that housing is a human right. Our mission is carried out through our partnerships. We are committed to policies and practices that reduce disparities in housing and within our organization. We ground our work in facts and data to dispel myths, challenge stereotypes, and fill gaps in knowledge to drive change. And we prioritize housing solutions that will be affordable and sustainable long-term, focusing on this full spectrum of housing needs and experiences now and for generations to come. So how do we actualize our vision? Well, we know that a healthy housing system necessitates a comprehensive approach which intertwines housing affordability, creation, choice, and stability. People need to be able to afford their homes, period. We need all different kinds of homes for people to choose from in all communities across our state. And most importantly, people should have the right to safe, stable homes and be supported from the experiences of housing stability, eviction, and homelessness. So this is really how we weave a housing system that prioritizes the needs of our residents and that supports strong families and even stronger communities. Today, we'll really be exploring further the buckets of housing choice and housing stability as our presenters discuss the impact that housing has on our individual, mental, and physical and overall community health. Particularly in the aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic, we know people's social lives have changed drastically, leaving permanent changes to our daily routines. It has been reported that humans are now spending over 85% of their time in indoor settings. So as we continue to find ourselves spending more times indoors, the environments in which we exist behind those doors becomes crucial to better understand. You know, when an apartment complex is built without common or physical spaces made for social interaction, we see people living there are more likely to be discouraged from engaging with their neighbors. When families find themselves living in a home that, while it might be affordable, lacks enough bedrooms for family members to have their own spaces, we can see stress rise and tensions grow. When our home is cold or damp, when the walls are thin, and in order to stay warm in the winter and cool in the summer, we must shut out the natural light, we can find that people are more prone to depression. When your earned income is only enough to cover the costs to meet your basic needs, you are more often sacrificing going out to dinner, seeing a concert, spending time with loved ones. Our homes impact the choices we have, and those choices can, in turn, impact the quality of our lives. This is an increasingly important intersectional topic for housing advocates, developers, and community members to consider in their work and efforts to improve housing conditions moving forward. So what do I actually mean when I say something is intersectional? Well, intersectionality is defined as a framework for conceptualizing a person, group of people, or social problem as affected by a number of influences. It takes into account people's overlapping identities and experiences in order to understand the complexity of the experiences that they're facing. This series has continued to reinforce the reality that to best support a person's health and well-being, we need to engage in holistic advocacy that addresses people's basic needs and reduces the impact that stress can have on individuals and families. And we know that when we aim to achieve housing stability and affordability for all residents and households, everyone benefits. Protecting our lowest income renters builds a stronger baseline for the safety and stability of everyone. And I just shared this quote, a little bit of a plug. On Tuesday, November 19th, Brian McCabe and Ava Rosen will be joining us to provide a keynote presentation, exploring more the conversations that are had in the book, The Sociology of Housing. But this quote I read in their book and just stuck with me. I think it really speaks to why we're hosting this series and how foundational housing is to so many different conversations. Really quickly, as we think about the intersectionality of the conversation around housing, it's really important that we're also acknowledging its inextricable link to the land we live and build on. While there is still a lot of work to be done in addressing our history and the impact that it has left on many families, you can certainly start by learning a little bit more about the land that you live and work on. We encourage you to visit this website you see, nativeland.ca. We'll also share it in the chat as a starting place as you begin your journey to think about the relationship between the history of the land we live on and where we are now today. So without further ado, I'm so excited to introduce you to today's presenters. Unfortunately, Gary was not able to be with us this morning due to an unexpected turn of events. So Deb will be covering his portion. We will share his email in the chat in case folks do want to connect with both Deb and Gary. But very excited to kick it off to Deb Bibbins to talk us through the intersection of affordable housing and social health. And with that, I pass it off to you, Deb.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Danielle. Thanks for having Rick and I here. We're really excited about this conversation and about the opportunity to speak with all of you today. You know, as you said it, Danielle, when you were explaining why it's so important for us to be thoughtful around housing design and where and how we build communities and pockets of housing within communities. You know, we all want to live in a safe, supportive environment where we feel a sense of belonging. And I think that's the foundation really of what Rick and I are going to be talking to you today about. You know, housing design, for that very reason, should take into consideration how people are able to socially connect. And we're going to be talking through what that means, why social health is important, a little bit around types of housing that foster social connection, and then how we create those housing environments and how we create and improve housing design within our communities. All right, so let's take a look at some of the I think macroeconomic trends and that you all are probably aware of, but I'm just going to put them out there just as a framework for us to begin today. Right now, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the average household spends more than 30% of its after-tax income on housing. And for single people, that number is upwards of 40%. And by definition, that is not affordable. It's not sustainable. And so when we are talking about housing, we're really being thoughtful around how do we build housing that not only brings people together, but enables them to live there, right? And to stay there and to age there over their lifespan. The second thing I want to mention is something that we're aware of also is that the baby boomers are aging, and we by 2030 will be in a place where 20% of the population will be age 65 or older. In Connecticut, we're already there. We've already reached 25% in a number of municipalities, and that number is going to continue to grow up for the next 5 or so years, and then we'll start to level off. But today, what we're seeing is that older adult housing is a problem, right? It's not affordable. As people are choosing to age in place, they are having trouble staying in their homes. And for many people, the opportunity to move into an adult living community just isn't possible. The numbers show that by 2038, the amount of people who will be age 80 plus living alone in their homes is going to more than double. So this is the first time in our history that we're even encountering this and thinking about this. So it's just one of the other trends that comes into play here as we're talking through everything today. So there's a positive trend. One of the things I wanted to mention is that we're seeing a lot of discussions around how to create new permanently affordable housing. Those conversations have been on the increase over the past couple of years, and I anticipate that there will be continued conversations, and that I'm optimistic about is going to enable all of us to be able to live comfortably into our future, and we'll be able to help our neighbors do so also. So let's start by talking about social health and why we should use a social health lens when we are creating and redesigning communities and housing. So social health may be a new term to some people. Social health is the dimension of our health that comes from connection and from community. And as it turns out, social health is the foundation of our mental and our physical health. As humans, we're social beings. We are meant to be together. And when we are living in housing that enables us to have that positive social connection, we are healthier and our neighbors are healthier. And so, you know, one of the things that we talk about For All Ages and with the Connecticut Collaborative to End Loneliness is that when we don't have the amount of positive social connection in our lives that we feel we need, that's when we become lonely. Loneliness is a little different from social isolation. Social isolation is very objective. It can be viewed. Someone is alone and not around other people. Loneliness is a feeling. You can't see loneliness. You experience loneliness, and each of us experiences it a little different. The reason it's so important to be thinking about social connection is that loneliness, especially chronic loneliness, is a root cause of so many mental and physical health ailments, starting with depression. So when we think about what loneliness can lead to, it's depression, it's anxiety, it's suicidal ideation, gun violence, domestic violence, substance abuse. And the statistics for older adults are really incredible. So lonely older adults have a 29% higher probability of developing heart disease, a 56% higher probability of having a stroke, and a 50% higher probability of developing some form of dementia. And so I'm just going to pause there and let you absorb what I just said. especially around dementia, right? With all of the work that we're doing, and we're seeing dementia on the rise. We have a way together of helping each other, and reducing the amount, or the probability of developing dementia simply by connecting with people. The reason that this is important and we're talking about it today is that right now more than 60% of us are feeling lonely on a regular basis. So loneliness is at an epidemic level. And as we're thinking about housing into the future, we know that if we can do things to mitigate loneliness, we're going to be healthier. One of the things that I wanted to just share, if I can take a moment, is that the Connecticut Collaborative to End Loneliness is hosting a conversation around this. So anyone interested in diving a little deeper into social health is welcome to join us at Central Connecticut State University on Wednesday, September 25th, 3:30 to 5. And you can register for this free event at our collaborative's website, which is endlonelinessct.org. So maybe we'll see some folks there. All right, so let's transition to the built environment. Setting out what social health is and why we should be thoughtful around social connection. Really comes back to how we design and how we build housing and how we create communities directly impacts our opportunities for connection, and it impacts social cohesion. It impacts our neighborhood trust, and it ultimately impacts our overall sense of community. So foundational to social connection is that we create spaces that give people the sense of belonging, that they are safe spaces, that they are near in proximity to others, and that there are opportunities for connection for all of us. So how do we go about doing that? Where do we even begin in thinking about housing through a social health lens? Well, let's start with the overall community. So as we're thinking about it on a macro level, housing should be placed to ensure proximity and accessibility to those shared social connection sites that are available within the community. So think about those publicly available spaces that are already out there, libraries, for instance, community centers, and even public school playgrounds that are accessible to community members to bring their families to and enable their children to play on when school's not in session. We're also talking about parks and even sports fields that are open, and greenways and trails, if our communities are so lucky to have them within them. And then we've got those privately owned but publicly accessible spaces that are also really important to social connection. Think coffee shops and restaurants, and faith institutions, right? Those are all places where we can find social connection. And it's really important when we're thinking about housing, that we ensure that people in our community have the ability to get there. So I'm not going to dwell on transportation, but did just want to put a plug in that as we are talking about housing, transportation plays a part. And certainly everyone in a community ought to have safe, reliable transportation to get to those places within their community where they can find social connection. We're not there yet. I know that this is something that is problematic, not only in Connecticut, but across the country. But I know there's lots of good work taking place, and hopefully over the next decade, we'll make some significant improvements there. The last public space that I just want to mention is streets. So we all have streets in our communities, and we should be thinking about how can we safely and temporarily close off those streets to provide opportunities for social connection for the members of our community. So whether it be a festival or a parade or a cultural performance or a farmer's market, there are opportunities to temporarily close off streets to provide social connection. And similarly, those areas that are adjacent to streets. So whether we're talking parking lots or alleyways or sidewalks, there are opportunities there and those public spaces to provide social connection opportunities for our local residents. All right, so now taking us and diving into the housing itself. right? So and when we're actually thinking about building and designing the housing, so the structures themselves, we've got multi-unit housing, right? So think multifamily housing, think older adult housing, and think apartments and condominiums. And those should all include spaces that cover what I call the 4 Cs. So the 4 Cs are, first, community spaces to socialize. Right, so every adult, every apartment complex, adult living community should have spaces where people can go, whether it be a lounge or a meeting room where people can congregate together, or whether it be a library or even a craft room. There should be spaces to bring the residents together within that community. The second C are crossing spaces. So crossing spaces are interesting. They are places where literally you can bump into your neighbor. Over in the UK, there is something called a bumping space initiative, where people are really being thoughtful about how to create opportunities to bump into their neighbors. And there's actually some research around how wide hallways should be to enable people to pass comfortably, but to also have them be really thoughtful about having a conversation and saying hello to their neighbor. Again, a lot of this work is from Europe, but translated into feet, we're thinking 5 to 6.5 feet is a standard good width for a hallway that enables 2 wheelchairs to pass comfortably, right, at the widest that it has to be, but still invite people to say hello to one another. The third C are connection spaces. And those are spaces that are adjacent to things like lounges and libraries within a multi-unit housing, where you can put a bench or you can put a set of chairs and people can sit and read, and they can say hello to their neighbors while they are crossing in front of them. And it just provides an opportunity for social connection and for conversation. And the final C are courtyards. So courtyards are those open spaces that we all are aware of, that we all think about. And they're flex spaces that allow neighbors to connect with one another and sometimes connect with nature also. So they're outdoor spaces. All right, so thinking about shared community housing models and why we should encourage them. That was, I think, in the write-up for this webinar that I was going to talk about that. And I want to highlight a few different types of housing, but really coming back to the fact that safe, affordable housing that center these shared spaces that allow opportunity for social connection really are enhanced when we are thinking about shared community housing models, right? And that they just foster those opportunities for social connection that are important to our health. And so let's start out with shared housing. Shared housing is something that, I think about roommates. I think about people living together. Someone may have a house or an apartment and they invite others to live with them. We are seeing a trend now where there's a lot of older adults that are aging in place alone, and especially those that are around college campuses are now starting to invite college students to have rent at a reduced rate, provide a bedroom in the home, and provide those communal areas of a kitchen and the living room. And the reduced rent comes with some chores that the student may do, and perhaps 2 or 3 times a week, there is a requirement to sit and have a meal with the person, the older adult who owns the home. We're seeing more of this taking place, and it's really promising because it provides that social connection for older adults. It enables them to stay in their home, which may be growing unaffordable for them, and it provides a really affordable rent for young adults. So that's on the rise, and we're excited to be seeing that. The second is cooperative housing, and that's where residents can become partial owners of a building and then have some say in how their spaces are centered to create social connection. And so that's exciting. There's something that's analogous to this that's taking place. It was piloted, and I'm just going to share this idea. There's an adult living community called the Garden Spot Village in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. So this is a typical adult living community on 220 acres where it's quite expensive to buy in and to purchase an apartment in this adult living community. But what they did is they took a half an acre of their space and they got together the folks that were already living there that were carpenters to start to frame out walls of a house. And to start to build them together. And then they brought in college students and they brought in a contractor to provide the foundation and the trusses and the roof. And they used the Habitat for Humanity model to build an affordable home that now houses, it's 3,400 square feet with 5 bedrooms, and it houses 5 older adults, 5 women who are in their late 60s, who are aging in place together, and they have come together, and it follows an affordable housing model where they pay 30% of their net income into, and it goes directly into maintaining the home. So they are paying typically what they would be paying if they were in HUD housing, but they have the access to all of the amenities of the adult living community, that broader community, and they have access to all of those community members. This was started in 2018. It has been so incredibly impactful and positive and beneficial to everyone involved that they are now making space to create 4 more of these houses on their land. So that's something that, is really creative thinking about how do we provide affordable housing for older adults? How do we give them an opportunity for social connection? And the last I just want to mention is co-housing. And those are where private residences are really centered around social spaces. And, think about this village movement that's taking place. And we've got a great example here that I think Danielle may be teeing up to talk about, and that really gets into one example of a micro village and why a young adult decided that this was really important for her and her family, and how she is going about creating a micro village. So Danielle, did you want to show that?
Yes, can everyone see the screen?
Yes.
All right.
This is Trish, a mom, social worker, and housing advocate.
We were really lonely in the suburbs. We had lived there for 2 years and realized we didn't know any of our neighbors, and so we just craved a deeper sense of community. So fortunately, we found this forming group, so we joined the ARIA residence before the building was even complete. I can hang out while we hang out. Hey, thanks.
She's amazing.
Yeah,
she's just creative too.
The difference between co-housing and a traditional neighborhood or any type of people living in close proximity is really just intention. So the people who live here because they want to live more communally. And so when they join, they agree to participate in the community, to attend community dinners, to give their labor towards bettering the community and the surrounding spaces.
Co-housing isn't a new idea, and it isn't very different from traditional homeownership. You still own your own apartment or house, but you gain access to shared spaces like community gardens and common rooms, where residents can cook, eat, and hang out together.
So much about co-housing is exactly what we wanted, but co-housing in itself is not affordable, and many people think that it is because there's so much sharing. So we looked around for different housing models that could bring that communal spirit and that togetherness, but have more affordability. We couldn't find one, so we decided to create a micro-village.
In 2021, Trish started work on the Chase Street Commons, a 1-acre piece of land being developed into an affordable, multi-generational co-housing community.
I mean, this is all unused space, so it's perfect for common green. And ideally, we wouldn't even, the cars would stop right here. So as you designed, we can have parking all there.
The conventional approach to real estate development would be to demolish these buildings and build new properties to maximize the land's value. Trish's approach is to optimize the land's potential to create connection and community.
Well, what if one home goes back here and one home goes here? Community gardens.
Definitely. We want to transform the existing space to include 4 or 5 households. We want to move cars to the periphery and instead put in walking paths and green space so that we can facilitate connection with one another. We want to convert our existing structures into common spaces. And one way that we're making street commons more accessible is by utilizing a land lease model. So typically when someone buys a single family home, they're paying for the house that's built as well as the land underneath it. We are trying to separate those two so that folks only have to come with the money to pay for the home, but they can purchase the land over time. So it creates an opportunity for people to own a home without bringing so much money up front.
For a variety of reasons, millennials aren't buying as many homes as prior generations. One of those is the high cost of entry. Even if you can afford a monthly mortgage payment, you might not be able to afford the down payment, up to 20% of the house and land combined, due up front. What Chase Street is working to do is break out the cost of the land so people have the option to purchase just the home initially and lease the land underneath it until they're able to purchase that too. This would lower the cost of the initial down payment, making homeownership more accessible.
Co-housing is one point on a spectrum of collective housing models. It's not for everyone, but I also believe that we all have the power to create little villages by just taking some of the principles of co-housing and infusing them in traditional neighborhoods.
Co-housing is one way younger Americans are reconceptualizing the dream of homeownership. Others are downsizing, finding ways to reduce their carbon footprint, or completely redefining what a home even means in the age of remote work. These trends all speak to a generational desire to customize the American dream to fit personal values and ambitions. Perhaps the beauty even of the American dream is that it doesn't have to take any particular shape. For some, it could be a life of adventure. For Trish, it means a life of community.
My dream is to find a sense of purpose and meaning that's a world where we're each feeling connected to one another and in a space where we can support one another. And I think that we can do that.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Rick Brush, and I lead a national nonprofit called Wellville. And I will say a little bit more about Wellville in a bit. Wellville is working with 5 communities over 10 years to improve the conditions of those communities, not through outside intervention, but really by helping community members, residents, local organizations, and others create the changes that they want to see in their own communities. So we've been doing this for a while, and I'm going to share a couple of examples related to housing. But first, I just wanted to say that sort of playing off the video, and thank you so much, Deb, for the opening, grounding us in social health and what it means, and really specific, tangible ways that housing can facilitate the kinds of connections that are important to us. I saw recently a survey from Harvard University has an initiative called Making Caring Common. And they did a survey in May, a national survey. I think about 1,500 adults participated. And what was interesting to me about that is that it starts to dig under the surface about how do people experience loneliness and sort of what's at the root of that. And what that survey showed is that it's 2 things. People who are experiencing loneliness experience it as both a disconnection from other people. 34% in that survey said that they don't have any meaningful groups in their lives. And also not enough close family and friends, 26% said. So it's this disconnection from other people, but also just as important is a disconnection from purpose. Purpose, sense of belonging, knowing where you are in the world. And this survey found that it really has a profound impact on, we could be surrounded by people, as Deb said, and also still feel lonely. if we're not having this meaning and purpose in our lives. And in this survey, sadly, 26% said that they feel as though their place in the world is not important. And almost 20% said that they don't feel a part of this country. So, this is a really profound experience that so many of us are having at the moment. And when they looked at what solutions people might participate in, they talked about community. They talked about community gatherings and ways to come together, and also creating spaces in community that facilitate those connections. So I think what I want to do is just underscore that housing is an opportunity for two things. It's both an opportunity for models that facilitate connection, like Deb talked about, a lot of really good examples, co-housing and others. And it's also an opportunity for how we do this work. How do we think about our communities and what's our sense of agency in working together? Because there are community building practices, and I'll share a few from Wellville, that bring people together. And housing is one of those opportunities. So one of the things that I saw recently, although it's been around for a while, is an Urban Institute report. It's from 2017. I'll put it in the chat in a minute when I'm not talking, around housing as a building block for inclusion. And I'll just share a quote from that. Using housing as a building block for inclusion means creating more mixed income neighborhoods. This is neighborhoods where people have an opportunity to interact with each other, across demographics, with greater access to opportunity for low income and vulnerable populations. But it also means, in this quote, that we can design these communities in participatory ways, using processes that invite people to the table, deliberate, and really ultimately reinforce social cohesion in those communities. So I think that's sort of the spirit of the examples I want to share. I'm going to share two examples from Wellville, and if there's time, I'll share one from the town I live in, which is Simsbury, Connecticut. So again, Wellville, national nonprofit, we've been working with these 5 communities around the country, Connecticut, South Carolina, California, Oregon, and Michigan. You can find more on our website, wellville.net. And it's really an idea of creating and facilitating change from within and helping communities realize that they do have the capacity to create these changes. So the couple that I want to share related to housing are actually much broader than housing, because as Deb shared, housing doesn't stand in isolation. It relates to streets and transportation and the local economy and ways for people to participate and play and worship in their communities. And so the first example is in the north end of Hartford. And I know that folks here probably know a little bit about Hartford. I think there's probably a lot of folks from Connecticut here. So Hartford is a pretty diverse city. It's a city of neighborhoods. The north end of Hartford includes 3 neighborhoods. One of those neighborhoods is the lowest income neighborhood in all of Connecticut. It's a real juxtaposition against West Hartford in terms of life expectancy. It's about a 15-year gap in life expectancy. So it does have challenges. And at the same time, there's a tremendous amount of assets in Hartford and in the north end of Hartford, Keeney Park, which is an amazing, beautiful park. But I think the people and the culture and the relationships in Hartford are really what stand out. So this first example is called Transforming Communities Initiative. It's a project, multi-year project. It's received funding from Trinity Health. St. Francis is the local hospital under Trinity. And it's being facilitated by the YWCA of the Hartford region. And they've been in about a year in conversations with local residents of the community about what they want to create. And of course, housing is an issue. Housing is an issue everywhere. But what they're really looking at is, as they describe it, as the residents describe it, a healthy living residential model. That does not mean, wiping everything away and creating some new development. It really means appreciating the assets and building on the assets in the community. So it's affordable housing plus agreements around how we want to live together as a community, facilitating intergenerational connections, collaborating with residents to tackle all of these other issues like violence and food insecurity. There's a Healthy Bodega initiative that's part of it. There's thinking around creating a health and mental wellness hub. And so this is really early. They've been in conversations with residents for about a year. They're beginning to talk with other neighborhood developers who might share their vision, and they're beginning to understand what kind of investment would be required to do this. So it's an early example, and then I'll share with you an example that has been in process for a much longer time. But what I want to say is that the threads here, the themes in these stories are the same. They're really around neighbors coming together, often with local institutions, local organizations, and finding their shared interest in creating this long-term community that supports well-being for all. And this particular proposal in Hartford calls for a resident-led board that will guide the development and then ultimately the ongoing engagement of community members as decision makers in what happens. And I just want to share some quotes from Denise Holter. Denise, I work with her very closely, have now for a number of years, and she leads something called the Community Action Task Force. And what she said is that the way this project is being done is vastly different than so many development projects that we see, because it's to make sure that all of the needs of our residents, our neighbors, are not only met, but that neighbors and residents have a role in creating this development. So what she said is the perception of the residents in my neighborhood is that we're weak and passive and dejected. And the truth is that we love our community, we love our neighbors, and we have a very clear vision of what our best lives look like. And what she said about the process is so far is that it's been really challenging. It's challenging to build trust, particularly in a neighborhood where folks feel as though they've been left behind. And so it's been a really thoughtful process to create meetings and what she calls a safe space where residents are free to express their experiences, even and often when there's such painful experiences. So progress to date, they, I think, have gained the trust of residents. They keep showing up because this group of leaders in the community keep showing up and listening, and people are starting to see that the recommendations are being acted on, and that if they can keep doing that, they can engage more people in the process and gain momentum. And this is, again, very early, but I just want to share that this is one of the ways in which how matters as much as what, because all of this work obviously will have tangible output, affordable housing and community centers and so forth. Just as importantly, they're going to be strengthening these social connections and their belief in each other by doing this work. So the second example, and I know I need to speed it along a little so we get to your wonderful thoughts, examples, and questions. So the second example is in Spartanburg, South Carolina, another one of our Wellville communities. And in Spartanburg, there's been an initiative that around for quite a while. It's been more than a decade. It was launched in 2011. It's called the Northside Development Project, run by a nonprofit Northside Development Group. And the story of Spartanburg, briefly, is that it was a mill town for many, many years. And, you know, just like many communities across the country, you know, it has experienced its share of downturns and loss of jobs. But more recently, like over the last couple of decades, you know, Spartanburg has seen a real resurgence and prosperity coming into the community and new industry, including BMW has a manufacturing facility nearby. So there are a lot of jobs that have come back. The downtown area is really booming. And yet there are still neighborhoods like Northside that have not participated equitably in that prosperity. So this is a really important project to the city of Spartanburg. And it was actually started by a former mayor, Bill Barnett, who knew that, you know, as goes the North Side, you know, so goes Spartanburg. We need all of our communities to thrive if we're going to succeed together. And so this collaboration really began with residents. And Bill, you know, a people person as mayor, identified a number of residents who were interested in being part of the change. And I'm going to fast forward a little bit here. They created a group called the Northside Voyagers, and this is a group of resident leaders who have been working together over more than a decade toward, in their words, changing the community one brick at a time, while also remembering its rich and diverse history. And I think that's really important because this is about development without displacement. This is about, you know, expanding access and availability of homes without, kicking people out of their own neighborhoods. And so this Voyagers has worked together with developers, worked together with local funders, Mary Black Foundation, local college of osteopathic medicine, and the city of Spartanburg to kind of cultivate this shared process for developing the North Side. And I just want to share a couple of quotes again from Deborah Moore, who is a resident who was part of the Voyagers. And she grew up in the North Side in the 1950s. She recalls fondly this tight-knit neighborhood. As she says, if you did something wrong, your parents knew about it before you even got home. It's a kind of neighborhood where people cared about each other. And then she came back in the early 2000s, and some of this downturn and its effects, especially on neighborhoods like Northside, she was sort of shocked by what she saw, this physical and social deterioration of the community, and it was painful. It was, as Denise described, a painful experience. So she joined the Voyagers, and this process of training, visiting other communities around the country, and really believing that and building trust over time that residents and organizations could work together to do things differently has come to fruition. And today, the North Side has this multi-phase project, many of which the phases have been already implemented. There's a $14.5 million mixed-use project that includes a teaching clinic for the schools, offices for nonprofits, and also mixed income apartments. A more recent project, $17 million mixed income rental housing development, was completed in 2021. Has about 90 apartment units, 81 are mixed affordable, just 9 market rate. But I think the intention here is to, again, create a mixed income community without displacement of residents. So there's a whole lot of other things happening. There's new parks, there's a new community center, there's an early learning center, and a healthy food initiative in this community. So it's a real example of progress being made in a very purposeful way. And in fact, this is one of a network of what's called purpose-built communities around the country. And I'll put that link in the chat as well, because I think what it shows is that development can be done differently. It can be done in such a way that is inclusive, economically diverse, diverse by race and ethnicity, and that residents can feel like a valued part of the process. So I have a couple of minutes, I think. So I'm just going to share quickly an example from Simsbury. So I live in the town of Simsbury, Connecticut. Those of you in Connecticut probably know it's a suburban community. It's about 12 miles outside of Hartford. And I want to share this example for a couple of reasons. One is that this kind of thoughtful process and engaging community members to create the changes they want, it's not only happening in cities, it's happening in suburban and rural places as well. And I think it's important in a state like Connecticut, where we do need to expand access and affordability in communities like mine. But I also want to share it because I want to get real about the resistance and some of the challenges of doing so. And that's why the word affordable in the title of this webinar was in parentheses, because affordable can be a trigger word for some. And I believe there's value in listening to why people are afraid of the word affordable. And so in Simsbury, we engaged in an 18-month process. It was a community engagement and education process to see how do our residents feel about expanding affordability and inclusivity and diversity of housing in a town like ours. And so we engaged hundreds of people over this 18-month process. We had education sessions. We did a survey. About 300 people actually answered the survey. And what we found is that sure enough, people have very strong views. Some people are extremely resistant to changing the community that they love. Other people are strongly advocating for more affordability in town. And I think what we found in the survey is that where they meet in the middle is that everyone realizes that we can't do nothing. because the housing crisis is real and it affects everyone, whether it's kids returning from college who can't afford to live in their town they grew up in, or retirees who want to, live here beyond their earning years. We need to be thinking about this. And I think second is that if we don't think about this, then residents really won't have a choice in what happens. Development will happen in a community like ours. And so we had a community forum as sort of the final stage of this engagement process, where people sat around round tables together for 2 or 3 hours, and they really hashed out, their concerns and their aspirations and what they wanted to do together. And they presented back to the town of Simsbury, in one unified voice, that we need to be proactive about this, and we need to figure out how we can, expand access to our town in a way that, we feel builds on what's so good about this community in the first place. And that led to the formation of Simsbury's Affordable Housing Policy Committee, which is a really diverse cross-sector committee, inclusive of our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Council, inclusive of, housing, inclusive of zoning, of finance, of education, of businesses, to really sit around the same table and decide how we can meaningfully engage residents in this journey to expand affordability in Simsbury. So those are my 3 examples, and I just want to sort of close our formal presentation with a thought here. And I hope part of the reason you showed up today is that you're concerned about this surge in loneliness, and the Surgeon General has declared it an epidemic. You want to know what we can do to reconnect people. And hopefully you have some appreciation of this sort of deeper loss of purpose and belonging that's underneath this. And so I know that Deb and others are saying, well, where can we turn? Where are the opportunities? And I think housing, or more specifically homes, our homes. We're talking about homes, and what's more central to our lives than homes? The home is the place where you belong, where you're safe, where you matter. And in this sense, it seems like this housing crisis and this loneliness crisis might be rooted in the same need and the same opportunity, which is to create the kind of communities that we all want to live in together. So that's sort of the message that I hope you take away today, but we would love to hear your thoughts, questions, examples. I'll turn it over to Danielle.
Yeah, thank you. Just really quickly gonna pin our presenters so that in case they have anything that they want to add in, please do. I did see one question in the chat that I'll turn it over to both of you first. I have some thoughts as well I can share, but folks came here to hear from you. So the question is, love the microvillage concept, but density runs up against so many towns planning and zoning regulations. How can we tackle this statewide instead of doing battle by special exceptions, project by project, town by town?
I love that. I'm just going to say one thing and then turn it over to Deb if she wants to add. But there are so many examples in Connecticut of the Simsburys, and I didn't list them all, but you all should check out a few of these. There's something called the All-In Alliance, and I don't remember how many towns. There's at least 6 towns, I think, participating in it. So look at All-In Alliances. I'll find the link. All-In Alliances, Connecticut. Milford, Oxford, Seymour, Derby, it's the Naugatuck Valley. So there are towns that are coming together to, not just think individually. So that's one thing. And then the second thing I want to say is that the Connecticut Council on Philanthropy has this housing affinity group, and there actually might be some funders and others part of that group on the webinar today. And they issued an RFP called Building a Suburban/Rural Housing Movement. And I think what they recognize is that we really need to meaningfully engage people in our suburban and rural communities, and understanding, that there's both a challenge but an opportunity here. And ultimately, those suburban rural communities advocating not just in their towns, but coming together and advocating at a state level.
Danielle, go ahead. I don't have anything to add to that. That was great, Rick.
Yeah, I think the only thing that I'll say is I just want to acknowledge that question is real. Connecticut has 169 independent municipalities, which are the decision-making bodies for what gets built. There is an opportunity at the statewide level to get involved in zoning reform that allows for more flexibility in development. So if you want to have some of those conversations, you can reach out to me or anybody at the partnership team. But also, you know, in the theme and in the vein of thinking about social health, there is an opportunity for us to come together within our local spaces, within our municipalities, within your town, with other residents, and to have these conversations at the local level. I think it's going to be a both and kind of conversation, right? There's the opportunity to make change at the state level. There's the opportunity to engage our federal delegates as well in some of these conversations. But since the decision-making capacity exists at that local level, I think we need to also be starting there and encouraging more folks within our communities to think about, you know, as Rick said, right, like your home is such an important part of who you are and where you live and how you express yourself. It becomes really important that we see that as a community value for everybody, and that we're supporting our community members and our neighbors and our family members in participating in these conversations. And two really quick plugs. One is that All In Alliances will be speaking at the conference in November as well. So if you want to hear a little bit more from them, that's a great place to plug in. And what was the other thing I was going to say? One of the first conversations we had in this series was around how to better understand what is happening at your local land planning and zoning meetings, and the conversation around land use. So if you want some pointers and guidance on like what you can expect from those conversations, how they're sort of framing the conversation, some of the language that they use, that was a conversation we had, I think, back in February of this year. So yeah, just some other places you can plug in, but I'm not seeing any other questions. If anybody wants to use the last 3 minutes to come off mute or drop a question in the chat, we'll try and get to it. But as we wait for that, I will just take a moment to thank our presenters today. This was an incredible conversation. I think the conversation has been getting a lot of traction around how our social health intersects with the housing conversations we're having and just understanding social health in general. So there's a lot to dive into there, and I super appreciate your time this morning. Amy is my background supporter today. If you are able to drop the link to the to register for the conference again into the chat, that would be really helpful. And then I just wanted to make folks aware really quickly. I'm going to share my screen again. We have a few other things that I wanted to put on your radar. One is that next month, I mentioned this in the chat earlier, but we'll be having a conversation on climate justice with Desegregate Connecticut and some other folks. That'll be October 2nd from 10 to 11. That'll be the last webinar in the series. We'll drop the link in the chat. Please join us for that. And the other thing I just wanted to put on folks' radar, I know that the conversation at CCSU is also going to be happening, I believe, on the same day. So if you're feeling really interested in engaging in some social conversations, go out to CCSU earlier and then quickly make your way over to Hartford. We'll be working with the Connecticut Public, who put together a documentary on Connecticut's segregation and engagement with housing issues in the state. And we'll be closing out that evening with a panel conversation, as you can see, with Rep. Rojas, the House Majority Leader, the president of the Connecticut's tenant union, and some advocates and commissioners across the state. So just wanted to put that on folks' radar. Whoops. Yeah, and we'd love to see you there.
There's time to do both that day.
Yeah, you might get a little stuck in traffic, but we have space for everybody. So awesome. Thanks so much for joining us this morning. Again, the recording will be available on our YouTube page. You will all get it since you RSVP'd for today's conversation. Thanks a ton. We appreciate being in community with everybody. And please keep the conversation going beyond today's webinar. You know, that's part of why we're doing this.
Thank you.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having us.
Thanks so much, everyone.